From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. And coming up today from the Livestock Marketing Information Center, Jim Robb with this week's observations on the cattle markets. He'll pass along the new USDA Beef Import and Export Report released last Friday. And Jim talks about how China's ban on beef and pork imports from Canada could end up adding to beef supplies here in the U.S. Then, from the Beef Cattle Institute here at K-State, Brad White, Bob Larson, and Dustin Pendell will talk about some of the lead topics at a recent livestock antibiotic conference held in western Kansas. And Jeff Wickman awaits with this week's 4-H segment, where he talks with K-State's Beth Hinshaw about 4-H and county fairs. All that and more ahead on this Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
This is Agriculture Today, coming to you from the campus of Kansas State University. We're glad to have you along with us once again. We'll open up with this week's cattle market segment and go down the line to Denver, Colorado, and speak with the senior economist with the Livestock Marketing Information Center there, Jim Robb. Jim, we have new trade data to share that would hopefully encourage producers, and we'll talk about how this market we see presently compares to the price trends we saw in the Fed trade a year ago. But before all of that and more, this past week the Fed cattle market pretty much on an even keel once again, was it not?
Seems to have been pretty much on an even keel, as you said, Eric. Not a lot of trade, holiday-shortened week. Looks like we'll wait for the current week to help really establish the Fed cattle market.
This has been an ongoing theme for a few weeks now, though, that the market seems to have leveled off, and again, maybe it's reached the bottom. Your thoughts? Market's
definitely leveled off. You know, in contrast to last year, we're still stronger. We're above a year ago, year over year on the Fed cattle prices. Production was down 1.3%, and slaughter was down 0.5%. So we have a little bit of a decline here in the supply side, although it's been running higher so far this year, and the box beef cutout is holding together quite well. We're fully $9 a hundredweight above a year ago, $9.63 on the choice cutout, which is up 4.6%. So the market is kind of moving sideways on the Fed cattle side and being rather supported on a year-over-year basis by the wholesale beef market.
You make these comparisons to last year's factors in the markets and the fact that we are in better stead right now than we were this time in 2018. How much can we take from that in terms of the strength of this market looking forward, Jim?
Well, again, as I mentioned, the cutout is really the key here. Being up $9 a hundredweight year-over-year on the choice cutout is really a key underpinning of the marketplace. And then also we're more current in feed yards. That is, you know, cattle have been marketed aggressively. We have weights below a year ago, and the other factor we look at when we talk about currentness in the feedlots is the grading percent, and we're getting a much smaller percent of cattle grading choice. When we put the puzzle together, it says we're very current in feed yards, so we don't have to move a lot of animals this year, maybe even a few less than we had to move last year. So feedlots are in a good position if they need to wait for prices a little bit. That's never a good strategy over several weeks, but 1 week to the next it can work out. It seems to be that we're doing a little bit of that, and we're able to do that a little bit more than we could last year. The headwind here compared to last year is that there's quite a bit more pork in the marketplace, so that's something we're kind of keeping an eye on. Those pork developments both domestically and those export markets. That's kind of the negative difference year over year.
We'll talk about that in just a moment, but does not history tell us that current feedlot status tends to perpetuate itself for quite a while?
It does. When we head into the summer months and we're We're adding seasonally to the weights, but they're still below a year ago. That does bode well for the market being able to maybe slightly outperform the futures, for example. And that's kind of what we've been able to do in recent weeks, and we may be able to do that for several more weeks here this summer, especially if this demand profile stays as robust as it has been for some of the beef items from hamburger to steaks. Seem to have moved quite well over the shortened weekend and into the 4th of July sales period.
Well, you tell us, a new batch of international beef trade data to consider here. What do the numbers tell us?
Well, there's kind of a plus and a minus here, Eric. Starting with the import side, we were surprised. The May data came out last Friday, and the imports of beef by the U.S., that tends to be heavily manufactured products going into hamburger and processed meat items. But year over year, the imports from Australia, as they continue to have a very severe drought, were up 30%. That's surprising because Australia's exports to China have been very robust. In fact, year to date, they're up approaching 90% year over year. So huge increases, but we're still getting product coming to the U.S. And then some of the other countries, Brazil especially, and Uruguay, and are also still selling more to the U.S. So year over year in the month of May, imports of beef were up 6%. That was more than anticipated. On the flip side, on the export side, we'd been lagging a year ago in terms of our beef exports on a total tonnage basis. And we really narrowed the gap in the month of May, and we were right on a year ago's level, so no more year-to-year declines. We had strong gains year over year in our exports to Mexico, up 3%, South Korea up 10%. South Korea's been the really bright spot in exports this year. Vietnam up 14%, and other countries up 6%. So we lagged a little bit into China, Hong Kong, and to Canada, but to get these exports pulled back to last year's robust level, I think is making good progress, and now we'll see how we move forward into the rest of the summer. But on balance, the exports as good as it hoped, and the imports a little bit larger than anticipated.
Interesting in that, as you quoted there, the Mexico business, our sales of beef into that country were very, very firm, despite the absence of the approval so far of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement.
That's an important point, I think, Eric, and also our exports of pork to Mexico really fell apart in the month of May. So beef seems to have replaced some of the pork exports that we had been shipping to Mexico. So the Mexico market is very important to both beef and pork, and there seems to be a little bit of switching that's gone on to the benefit of beef with respect to the Mexican market in the last couple months.
Well, there's the other customer that garners so much attention, and that is China, via Hong Kong often is how that works. But there's something else going on that you thought is worthy of bringing to producers' attention, and something that the beef cattle industry might want to keep a close eye on. The Chinese have banned imports of Canadian beef and pork. This is over the feed ingredient that's often used in the pork industry, and that is ractopamine, correct?
Correct, Eric, and it's been an important story. The U.S. has been importing generally less beef from Canada in recent months, as they have really focused on China. So far this year, China has made up 6% of Canadians' exports, and they've more than doubled their export tonnage to China so far this year. So we need to watch that balance of exports from Canada to China, and that really takes away from exports coming from Canada to the U.S. So it's important. Ractopamine is the suspect, but there's more to the story here a little bit, Eric. Ractopamine was found in pork, supposedly, but there's quite a controversy now. There's a full investigation in Canada that the export certificate could be fraudulent. And so the story really unfolds, and they applied. Canada actually feeds very little ractopamine to their hogs, much less than in the U.S., and we also use ractopamine, and they do too in the beef system, but they specifically pointed to the authorities in China to pork. But immediately upon that release and the Canadians agreeing to stop exporting, Canada asked for the release of the CFO of Huawei, which is a major company in the world. You may have heard about it on the media. And their CFO, who's also the daughter of the head of the organization, has been held in Canada on various charges. And so they've asked for the release of this person. So nobody really knows whether this is really a ractopamine story or more of a political story. In either case, it does show a bit how tenuous these exports can be to China, and Canada is really suffering through one of those experiences right now where they had made major inroads into the Chinese market and all of a sudden got shut off. Something to understand for our industry, but also to think a little bit about fraudulent certificates and investigations into the international world of essentially espionage is what Canada is doing an investigation on. So sometimes there's more to the story with respect to China. This seems to be one of those, Eric, and again, does have some potential impacts on the U.S. They're not able to reopen their exports to China. Most likely the bulk of that product will be redirected towards the U.S. marketplace, which would be a headwind for our cattle prices.
So as we look ahead to this trading week, do you see the fed cattle market gaining a little ground after basically holding steady for quite some time?
Well, it would be rather unusual for us to gain a little bit in the fed cattle market at this time of year, Eric, but it certainly is a possibility given where we're set up in terms of the weights of cattle, the wholesale beef market, and probably the need for packers to get cattle for their needs as we look to the coming weeks, and depending on how they've marketed beef ahead. So I wouldn't be surprised if we can hold the market steady, which again would be good news this time of year, or maybe even be able to add a little bit to the fed cattle market, depending on how the movement is perceived over the past week and the 4th of July sales period.
Very well. Jim, as always, we thank you for your comments and your input, and we'll catch up with you again quite soon. Appreciate your time.
It's been my pleasure, Eric.
He is a senior economist with the Livestock Marketing Information Center, which, of course, is co-sponsored by a number of land-grant universities, including K-State. That's Jim Robb with this week's Cattle Market Remarks here on Agriculture Today.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
This is Agriculture Today, and time now for another round of discussion on the part of the K-State experts who staff the Beef Cattle Institute here at the university. They regularly get together to hash over cattle health and management topics on the BCI Cattle Chat podcast. Aboard this time, veterinarians Brad White and Bob Larson and livestock economist Dustin Pendell. Brad leads things off with a recap of a recent conference in western Kansas on livestock antibiotic use.
First, I want to talk about, and I'll tell you a little bit about this High Plains conference. So High Plains is a feed yard, but they set up, and they've had a couple conferences there that have a wide reach. And so they set up a conference this year that was on appropriate antimicrobial use and stewardship. And they had people in, somebody from the FDA, somebody from the Center for Food and Drug Administration, somebody from the Center for Disease Control, somebody from Costco, a veterinarian that did all poultry, spoke on their experiences with antibiotic use. Dr. Kathy Simmons from NCBA was there as well. And then as well some research updates. So a really interesting conference talking about what are all the aspects of antimicrobial use and how does that tie in with how we make decisions today. Some of the things that we talked about, and several of us here from BCI went to that conference, a lot of good conversation on the importance of stockmanship and promoting animal welfare.
So basically just promoting animal health so that antibiotics are used as little as possible.
Absolutely. And trying to make sure that we do the right things all the time. And sometimes that's the hardest, is that level of consistency.
Well, just the day-to-day.
Yeah. The other topic that came out of that, and in addition to the day-to-day events, was thinking about the balance between, because it's easy to take this as a maximum or minimum approach, right? So we can use antibiotics anytime, or we can never use them. But that optimization and kind of somewhere in between of how do we pick when we want to use them and when we can't. And everybody's definition differs a little bit.
Yeah, so if we really talk about an optimization, meaning that I get the most bang for my buck, whether that's animal performance, least concern about a resistance issue or whatever, but I'm using the products, but I'm trying to get the maximum use from the choices I make of when I use antibiotics.
Yeah, and to be clear, we're not using antibiotics for animal performance, because that's not how they're labeled. But that may be a metric that's used to measure health.
When I'm a veterinarian, when I say performance, a lot of times I mean things like, well, the percent of animals that got sick, or so that's I threw that term in there as a veterinarian, meaning
morbidity, mortality.
Yeah, risk of getting sick, risk of dying, that type of thing.
But that's another key point is making sure everybody's speaking the same language. Because you said those words, and
to a different person listening, veterinarians have their own perspective versus, say, a nutritionist or a consumer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or maybe an economist, when they think about optimization, you're trying to maximize maybe profits or net returns.
Yeah.
So the other thing that, and I wanted to kind of get you guys' opinion on, as we talked through from that day, there was also a lot of discussion on not just using antibiotics, but where does that fit into the story of beef, as I'd call it. So there was a representative from Costco. They were talking about some of the differences that they've had to face and the feedback that they get from consumers. What do you guys think? Where does, not just for this conference, where does antibiotic use fit into the story of beef?
Well, I guess one of the ways I think about it is and again, probably my ideas aren't the best ideas, but I think what the consumers really want is that we are optimizing, we're utilizing well. I think people understand that there's times when you're going to need, you can almost use any technology, that there's times when that's very beneficial, and times where if you got sloppy and you used it all the time, that it's probably wasteful. So I don't know that consumers are necessarily asking us to produce beef in one certain way, but to do it in a way, so to produce beef in a way that considers, the human aspects of the production side of it. Are the workers safe? Are the consumers safe? Are the animals well cared for? And so I think it being antimicrobial use or any other technology, I think the story is that we're using a variety of technologies to try to optimize the human and animal aspects of animal agriculture.
What do you think, Dustin?
I don't know that I'm going to disagree with what Bob said. I think there is that consumer, and I don't think they want, like you said, just one way, and hey, we just want to minimize as few as possible antimicrobials, but more, are you treating the animals right? Are you not going above and beyond using additional to try for maybe its performance use? Yeah. And so part of it, I think, comes back to communication. I mean, we've talked about this in many podcasts in the past, but I think it's just about, this is what we do. This is why we do it.
Well, and another thing about communication is a lot of communication is built on trust or the lack of trust, in that if I don't trust you, you could speak a long time and you wouldn't change my opinion. But if I did trust you, you could give me a pretty short soundbite that I would believe. So part of the communication is the longer term. Make sure that we've got good trust. So, and the way you lose trust is you make mistakes. So try really hard to avoid mistakes. So try make sure that we are trying to keep people and animals safe, and that the system works pretty good. Not that it works 100% of the time, but that we can garner that trust by avoiding mistakes. So that's one part of it, is don't do dumb things.
Absolutely. And I think that is one of the things that was really encouraging about this conference. Is you had people from government, you had people from veterinary practice, you had people from private producers, all across the board there trying to say, how do we make this work, and even the retailers. So I think conferences like that are important. Lots of good take-homes from that one. It was interesting to see the variety of perspectives. And now we'll talk about, I'm going to start, Dustin, I'm going to start with you. We had a little discussion before, and we were talking about what are your top traits for a beef cow. So if you're picking a cow, how are you going to measure which cow is best?
So when I was younger, when I had to go out there every morning and feed the cows, take care of them, I had this one cow that would always chase you. So I would say temperament.
That's not best.
When I was younger. Now, I don't know if this is a trait, but I would say one that makes me money. Which obviously is comprised of a whole bunch of different things, whether you're talking produces calves,
but I think that's kind of an obvious statement, but it's one to really keep at the center of the focus is one that makes money.
Right, but I think there's a whole bunch of different traits that I'm sure you guys will hit on, different ones that will contribute to that, whether that's from a feed standpoint or, like I said, a calf standpoint or a...
She has to generate income, and we want her to have minimal costs necessary to generate that income. So not minimal costs, but kind of our optimization again.
Right.
So I'm going to say the main thing I'm going to look for is going to be, I'm going to start on the income side, that I want a cow that generates income for me steadily and every year. So she has a calf every year, and it's a calf that is valuable to the industry. So it's one that I have a lot of people that want to purchase it from me. So my best cow is one that generates quite a bit of income.
And that could be operational specific. So it could be a really good feeder calf, or it could be a really good fed animal, or it could be both.
Correct.
But depending on how you're marketing, value will have different merits.
And I think so that best cow at least does pretty well on the income side.
What about on the expense side?
Yeah.
How does that play out?
Well, then a lot of the ways I can keep track of cost is what does it take to keep her in good body condition? Because on the production side, let's say I need to keep her in good, moderate body condition throughout the year, even times of the year when the forage is not green and growing, that I'm dealing with dormant forage or supplements. So I need to be able to have her maintain her body weight without expending too much on the supplement side or the grazing dormant forage side. So I'm looking for a cow that can maintain her body weight, maintain her body fat throughout the year with a minimum, and I shouldn't say minimum, let's say optimum amount of expenses to keep her in that body condition.
Yeah, and I'm going to throw something else on top of that, because I think that one is often talked about, and the one that's talked about less is I want a cow that will minimize her depreciation. She stays in the herd.
So she stays in the herd a long time.
Long enough that she pays for herself. Because otherwise, if I bring in heifers, they often don't pay for themselves until we get to year 4, year 5, somewhere in there. If they're falling out early, then I have to shift that cost to other cows in my herd. My average cow cost goes up. So not just feed costs. Feed costs are a big cost.
I think you're right.
But she's got to stay in the herd a long time.
And a lot of what we're saying isn't really earth-shattering, but it's a profitable cow that generates more income than she costs. And the way she does that is she has a calf every year, stays in the herd for a long time, so she spreads her costs out over a lot of calves, and that she keeps her costs down. So it's income and costs and depreciation will get to my profit.
K-State's Bob Larson, Dustin Pendell, and Brad White. Hear the entire podcast at beefcattleinstitute.org, beefcattleinstitute.org. You're tuned to Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
This is Agriculture Today. I'm Jeff Wickman. More than 100 county fairs will be held across Kansas over the next 7 to 8 weeks. culminating with the State Fair in September. In addition to rides and all kinds of food, 4-H animals and exhibits are a major drawing card for the entire community. Southeast Area 4-H specialist Beth Hinshaw encourages everyone to visit their county fair. Beth County Fair season either in full swing in some areas or about to get into full swing in others, and this is really an opportunity to showcase what 4-Hers have been working on and what they've learned over the past several months.
Definitely. You know, the 4-H year started back in October, and we have some of our young people who started with projects even way back then. Others have really turned it on, you know, once school got out and they, you know, had maybe more time to work on projects. But, you know, that opportunity to exhibit and showcase the things that you've learned, we know that that's very motivating for young people to learn more and do better and to perfect what it is they're working on.
And a lot of this is, I guess, kind of learned through the years of 4-H as they receive that feedback from the judges?
Yes, that's a really important piece about the fair and about taking an exhibit to the fair is, you know, not only are you showcasing what you've learned, but you're going to actually sit down with a subject matter expert and you're going to go over that project with that person. And so you're going to learn what, you know, I needed to do differently on this rocket or what I did really, really well. Or, you know, when I bake banana bread again, this is something that I need to consider. And so, you know, not only do they come away really understanding, you know, what concepts that they've very much mastered, but also what it is that they need to work on for the future.
And the judging is kind of unique in the fact that you really have kind of a philosophy that you like the judges to follow, and that's really being fair, firm, friendly, and consistent.
Most definitely. And most of our judges do such a really great job of this. Most of our inside exhibits especially are judged in a way that we call conference judging. And so that's where you actually sit down with a judge and have that conversation about your item. We also use Danish judging where we're not necessarily judging things against each other, we're judging it to a standard. So if you've reached, you know, way above the standard, you'll have a purple ribbon. If you're a little bit above the standard, it's a blue. And if you've just hit the standard, it's a red. And so, you know, there can be as many blues or as many purples or as many reds or as many whites as there need to be when you use the Danish style of judging.
And this is important because some of these will advance to the state fair.
Most definitely. Those items that get a purple or a state fair blue, if the young person is 10 and older in most project areas, are able to take those on to the state fair. And by having that conversation with a judge, they learn, you know, maybe there's something that I need to go in and fix on this item before I take it on to the state fair. There's like one little tweak I can do to make it a little bit better.
Giving them a much better chance to improve and do even better at the state fair.
Definitely. And again, learn something else.
The other aspect to the county fair is the fact that there's an opportunity for the 4-Hers to exhibit some of the leadership skills that they've learned through the year and also just to do some volunteering.
Most definitely. You know, county fairs run on volunteers, and you see volunteers all over the county fair. So a number of our 4-H members are going to go in before the fair ever starts and do fair cleanup. They may help in a certain project area as a junior superintendent or just an assistant during the judging process. Lots of our 4-H families have the opportunity to work in a 4-H food stand or a pop stand or help with special events during the county fair. And then many of those same families are going to go into the fair afterward and clean up. So there are all kinds of opportunity for leadership and, you know, teamwork with your fellow 4-Hers to make the fair work.
And some of this is even fundraising.
Definitely. You know, when we have concession stands, we know that that is funding all kinds of great things that are going to happen in the 4-H year ahead. And that's probably one of the main fundraisers for a lot of our 4-H programs.
You also have an opportunity, if you go to the fair, to walk around. You'll see a number of banners, and all of those are related to the clubs.
Yeah, definitely. You see banners, you see booths. There's pretty much always an opportunity to learn about 4-H at the county fair. And so, if people are thinking about 4-H, I say go to your county fair and look around and see what's possible, and you'll find information and people there to help you learn more about it for the next year.
I know a lot of people like to walk through all of the different livestock exhibits, but there's also a lot in just the exhibition halls that really are fascinating as well. There's just all sorts of things at the county fair.
Yes, and we really encourage people to come out to the county fair. A lot of times what we hear on the news is not great things about young people, and I always say if you come to the county fair and you walk through the exhibit halls and see the exhibits and you walk through the barns and see the work that the young people have done, you feel pretty good about the future. And you're right, they are just amazing projects that these young people have done, from anywhere from their visual arts to, we've got lots of aerospace kinds of things, geology, entomology, wonderful foods, just really, really interesting things and great skills that these young people are learning.
It really does provide just the general public with a great overview of all of the programs within 4-H.
Definitely. I think it's one of our best marketing tools. It probably is our best marketing tool for the 4-H program.
And if people would like to find out when the county fair might be happening in their location, they can go to the 4-H website, and that information is available.
Definitely. Go to www.kansas4h.org, and on the right-hand side, we have a little line that says, What's Hot? And if you go down there, you'll see a list of county fairs. And so if you click on that, you'll be able to look at the county fairs either by your county, or you can also look by date. And I encourage people to go to any of the fairs that are close to them and just see the wonderful things that our young people are doing in the state of Kansas.
That's Southeast Area 4-H Specialist Beth Henshaw. Again, a complete list of county fairs can be found online at kansas4h.org. Just look under the What's Hot heading. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.